Hey everyone, and welcome back. Imagine waking up in armor, trudging through mud and spending your day swinging a sword while your horse silently judges you. Sounds fun, right? Well, it wasn't. Stick around as we dive into the exhausting, ridiculous and surprisingly hilarious life of a medieval knight. If you enjoy this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more, and drop a comment below, telling me what part of knight life you'd absolutely hate the most. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get going. Congratulations, you've been knighted. Probably a mistake, to be perfectly honest, but everyone clapped and someone blew a horn, and now no one's quite brave enough to take it back. So here you are, a certified knight of the realm, a noble warrior, a hero of legend. Or at least, that's what the pamphlet said. You stand in your grand stone chamber, which is roughly the size of a broom closet, if the broom closet were also damp, freezing, and lightly haunted. The air smells faintly of wet limestone and long-forgotten ambition. Somewhere down in the courtyard, a rooster is attempting to greet the dawn, but sounds as if it's regretting all its life choices. You are a knight. And this allegedly is glory. The first thing you notice is that nothing about this morning feels remotely heroic. Your mattress is a loose approximation of straw and sadness, and your pillow appears to have been stuffed with gravel as some kind of practical joke. You've slept in your armor again, not because you wanted to, but because taking it off requires the combined effort of 3 squires, a pulley system, and a brief prayer for upper body strength. Your joints make a noise that can only be described as crunchy. The chamber's single window lets in a sliver of grey light, illuminating the floating particles of dust and regret. The poets and bards always describe the life of a knight as glorious. You'd like to have a word with them. Perhaps a duel, preferably one in which you get to use your sword and they have only a feather quill for defense. You were told there'd be honor, chivalry, epic quests, maidens sighing in your general direction. Instead, there's the faint smell of mildew, the persistent ache of chainmail rubbing against every conceivable patch of skin, and a schedule full of things that involve the words training, patrol, and latrine duty. You glance around your chamber. The walls are stone cold and eternally damp, as if the concept of dryness was outlawed several centuries ago. In the corner sits a wooden chest that has warped so thoroughly with age that it now leans against the wall like it's had a long night out. Your sword rests upon it, gleaming faintly in the early light. It's a magnificent weapon, hand-forged and beautifully balanced, which is impressive, given that you mostly use it to slice bread. Somewhere in the corridor beyond, a servant drops a bucket, swears creatively, and scurries away. The sound echoes through the stone like a reminder that no one in this castle has ever slept properly. Chotu, swing your legs out of bed. They ache. Your back aches. Frankly, even your soul aches. You make a mental note to commission a new mattress, but you know you won't, because you're broke. Because knights, as it turns out, aren't paid nearly as handsomely as the ballads would have you believe. You became a knight for the same reason most people do, a terrible combination of pride, peer pressure, and an unfortunate moment at a tournament in which you accidentally looked competent. Someone must have seen you stay on your horse longer than expected, and thought, "Ah, yes, that one. Let's give him a sword and some land that doesn't actually exist." Perhaps you looked good on a horse once, and they've never let you live it down. Your squire, a young man named Gregory, or possibly Geoffrey, you can never quite remember, appears in the doorway, looking cheerful in the way only people who don't have to wear 50 pounds of metal can manage. "Good morning, my lord," he says, far too loudly for someone whose skull is still ringing from the previous day's helmet-related mishaps. You grunt in response, which he takes as permission to enter. He begins the daily ritual of helping you into your armor, a process so tedious that you've often wondered if this is the real test of chivalry. Gregory, or Geoffrey, fumbles with the straps while you stare out the window at the grey courtyard below. 2 chickens are arguing over a worm. One of them wins. You can't tell which. You sigh deeply. It's going to be another long day of pretending, to enjoy violence for the sake of honor. Somewhere deep down you remember how you once imagined this life. You'd ride across open fields, Sunlight flashing off your armor, wind in your hair, your banner fluttering behind you like a promise of greatness. People would cheer, songs would be written. You'd probably get a nice horse with a poetic name like Thunderclap or Destiny. The reality, unfortunately, involves mud. Endless, clinging, personality-destroying mud. You have mud in your boots, in your armor joints, in your ears, and possibly in your sense of self-worth. Your horse's name is Mildred because she came, pre-named, and she bites. The romantic ideal of knighthood fades a little more each morning as you try once again to bend at the waist and fail. You remember how the local lord praised your courage when you accepted your title, how he spoke of the sacred duty to defend the weak, uphold justice, and look impressive while doing so. He neglected to mention the constant rashes. Still, you can't help feeling a faint, sleepy pride. You are technically part of history. A small, aching, underpaid part, yes, but a part nonetheless. You belong to an age of castles and banners, of bards and battles, of feasts and famine. You are the embodiment of nobility. Assuming nobility involves chronic back pain and frequent confusion. You shuffle over to the wash basin, a generous term for a bucket of water that looks like it's been used to rinse vegetables, and splash some on your face. It's freezing. You inhale sharply, as though you've just been knighted again, this time by a particularly vindictive icicle. Gregory hands you a tunic. It smells faintly of goat. You thank him anyway, because there's no point in fighting the inevitable. As he adjusts the final strap of your breastplate, you catch your reflection in a piece of polished metal. You look, well, like a man who's made several poor career decisions. The armor gleams, but your eyes are dead behind the visor. Outside, the courtyard is coming to life. Horses snort. Someone yells about missing turnips. A blacksmith hammers rhythmically, producing a sound not unlike your own pulse. You step out into the morning air, your breath misting before you, and realize this is it. The life of a knight. Heroic, noble, freezing. You take a moment to appreciate the castle's grandeur. The walls rise high, solid and ancient, covered in moss that seems to be the only thing thriving here. Banners flap in the chill breeze, though one of them appears to be upside down, and no one's bothered to fix it. The air carries a faint scent of smoke, hay, and something distinctly unidentifiable, which experience tells you not to investigate. Somewhere, a bard begins to sing, something about valor and destiny. You assume it's about someone else. You trudge onward, boots squelching slightly in the damp earth, armor clanking with each step. It's a sound that once might have filled you with pride. Now it's mostly a reminder that every movement requires effort. The great age of knighthood, it seems, is powered entirely by discomfort. Still, there is a strange beauty to it all. The grey sky, the distant hills, the knowledge that however miserable it feels, this moment will someday be romanticized beyond recognition. People in the future will look back and think, what a noble life. And you, if you could, would politely inform them that it mostly involved trench foot. Gregory hurries after you, holding your helmet like a prized relic. You nod to him solemnly, then sigh. Remind me again, you ask, why I chose this. He blinks. For glory, my lord. You pause, considering. Ah, yes. Glory. And how's that going so far? He hesitates. Not great, my lord. You smile faintly. Splendid. The day stretches ahead of you, long, cold, and predictably full of things you'd rather not do. But for now, as the castle wakes and the world hums with the weary rhythm of another medieval morning, you accept your fate. You are a knight, a hero technically, a slightly creaky, mildly smelly, and perpetually confused hero, but a hero all the same. So take a breath, adjust your armor, ignore the itching, and prepare yourself, noble warrior, for yet another glorious day in the most overrated profession in history. You awaken to the familiar sound of straw protesting your existence. It crackles beneath you like a distant campfire, except far less comforting and significantly itchier. The mattress, if we can be generous enough to call it that, seems to have developed its own personality overnight, and that personality is spiteful. Each movement releases a small cloud of dust, hay, and existential regret into the air, You lie still for a moment, staring at the ceiling beams above, which appear to be held together entirely by cobwebs and optimism. It's morning again in the castle, or at least a version of morning, a kind of perpetual grey that seeps through the slits in the stone wall and settles in the corners like old soup. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. Then, realizing how pointless it all is, it crows again, just to make sure everyone else is equally miserable. You pull your thin wool blanket tighter around you. It does absolutely nothing. The air has the temperature and texture of disappointment. You can see your breath, which is quite impressive, considering you haven't brushed your teeth in several rains at least. You turn your head toward the chamber door, half expecting to see your squire entering with some sign of civilization, a warm fire, a kind word, or perhaps a weapon with which to end your suffering. But no, the door remains closed. A small mercy, perhaps, because if you're honest, your room is not what one would call inspirational. Your chamber is a perfect blend of fortress and rodent Airbnb. The stone walls are perpetually damp, dripping with what you optimistically assume is water. A single wooden chair sits near the hearth, which hasn't been lit since the last crusade. There's a jug of water on a crooked table, a cracked basin beside it, and a suspiciously cheerful mouse staring at you from the corner, as if wondering whether you plan to finish your breakfast crumbs or if it may help itself. The decor is best, described as austere chic, though the only thing chic about it is the cold. You take a deep breath. It smells faintly of mildew, iron, and faint hope, the official scent of medieval knighthood. You close your eyes, briefly considering rolling, over and declaring the entire day cancelled. Unfortunately, knights don't get personal days. You are expected to rise, shine, and look heroic, all before your first existential crisis. You sit up. Your back cracks like an old oak tree in a stiff breeze. You're fairly certain you've aged 3 decades overnight. Time to dress. The process begins, as always, with the first layer, the humble linen undertunic. It's meant to serve as a barrier between your delicate knightly skin and the chainmail that will soon try to saw through it. You pick it up, give it a cautious sniff, and immediately regret doing so. Fragrant, you murmur aloud, though no one is present to appreciate your understatement. The fabric is rough, itchy, and perpetually damp, as if it's been soaking in history itself. You pull it over your head with the enthusiasm of a man stepping into his own grave. Then comes the woolen gambeson, a padded jacket designed to soften the blow of any incoming weaponry. It is, in practice, about as soft and forgiving as a sack of potatoes. By the time you finish fastening its many straps, you're already sweating, which is impressive, given that it's roughly the temperature of despair outside. And now, the main event, the armor, chainmail first. It glints dully in the light, a reminder of your social status and poor life decisions. You lift it with a grunt. It's astonishingly heavy, as if it were forged from pure resentment. You heave it over your shoulders, the cold metal kissing your skin like an unamused ghost. Each link tugs at your tunic, promising future blisters and lifelong regret. Next, the breastplate. You attempt to fasten it yourself, which proves about as practical as trying to fold a cathedral. You fumble, curse softly, and eventually accept defeat. You'll have to wait for your squire, who will inevitably look at you with a mix of pity and mild disgust, a look he's perfected over the years. You reach for your boots. They are made of genuine leather, which is to say they've absorbed every odor a human foot can produce. You slide them on, grimacing as something inside shifts. Unexpectedly. You tell yourself it's just the sole, it probably isn't. And then there's the helmet. Your least favorite part. It's an extraordinary piece of craftsmanship, perfectly fitted and utterly impossible to see or breathe in. You set it down beside the bed, eyeing it like an enemy you'll have to face later. For now, you'll pretend. It doesn't exist. You take a moment to stand. The full weight of your attire settles upon you, roughly equivalent to a medium-sized cow. You try to straighten your posture, but immediately regret the decision. The armor doesn't bend. It simply makes you wish you didn't either. You shuffle toward the wash basin. The water has developed a thin film overnight, a sort of medieval latte minus the joy. You splash it on your face, gasping at the cold. It smells faintly of iron. which you optimistically hope comes from the bucket, not the plumbing, which of course doesn't exist. Bathing, in theory, is encouraged once or twice a year. Any more frequent than that, and people start to talk. You recall an acquaintance who bathed twice in 1 week. He was promptly accused of sorcery. Still, you attempt some basic hygiene. You drag a damp cloth over your face, your neck, and a few areas of strategic importance. You tell yourself this counts as bathing. After all, the goal is not to be clean, merely less medieval. You consider brushing your teeth, but the nearest brush is made of horsehair, and last time it ended poorly. Instead, you chew on a sprig of mint that's seen better centuries and hope for the best. You glance at yourself in a cracked mirror shard. What looks back at you could be described as noble, if nobility included dark circles, dry lips, and a faint expression of disbelief. You give yourself a reassuring nod anyway. You are technically a knight, and now has breakfast. You sit at your small table, where your squire has left your morning meal. A bowl of porridge, which has cooled into a state of gentle defiance, and a piece of bread so hard it could double as a defensive weapon. You tap it lightly against the table. The table loses. The porridge, meanwhile, stares back at you. It has the texture of regret and the flavor of humility. You take a spoonful. It's tepid, lumpy, and faintly metallic, probably from the spoon, or possibly from the water. You decide not to investigate. You chew the bread. It doesn't yield. Easily. You imagine in another life it might have been used to patch castle walls. Still, it's sustenance, allegedly. Across the room, the mouse from earlier is still watching you, clearly hoping you'll abandon your breakfast so it can take over. You stare at each other in silence, two creatures bound by mutual disappointment. You sigh. Fine, you whisper, breaking off a piece of bread and tossing it toward the mouse. It snatches the offering and vanishes into the shadows. You can't help feeling it's living a better life than you are. You finish your meal in contemplative silence, the clink of your spoon echoing softly against the stone. This is the morning routine of a knight. No fanfare, no glory, just cold. Air, itchy fabric, questionable hygiene, and porridge that may predate your knighthood. You stretch once more, the armor creaking in protest, and stare toward the door. The day awaits, full of duties, drills, and further indignities. But for now, in this brief, absurdly uncomfortable peace, you let yourself breathe. Somewhere in the distance, a trumpet sounds, announcing perhaps that someone else has been foolishly knighted. You wish them luck. They'll need it. Morning arrives again, uninvited and smug about it. The training field outside glistens with dew, which would be lovely if it weren't also the surest sign that I'm about to spend the next several hours falling repeatedly onto damp grass. The air carries that crisp metallic tang that suggests both promise and tetanus. I can already hear the sound of clanging armor and the dull groans of men regretting their life choices. It's less a training ground and more a museum of collective suffering. I trudge into the yard, armor creaking like a discontented door, greeted as always by Sir Reginald of Upper Snoring, a man whose defining features are a perpetually furrowed brow and the distinct aroma of onions and disappointment. "Morning," he grunts, his breath wafting over me like a faintly aggressive soup. "Ready for sword drills?" He asks it not because he expects enthusiasm, but because the alternative would be silence, and Reginald fears silence almost as much as he fears emotional growth. I tell him I am, though the truth is I haven't felt truly ready for anything since the day I agreed to become a knight. He hands me a training sword that's allegedly made of wood, though I suspect it was, carved from petrified regret. He demonstrates a few swings that appear designed to dislocate both shoulders, then gestures for me to copy him. I attempt to, though my copy looks more like an interpretive dance about exhaustion. My first swing overshoots entirely, the sword slips from my grip, and I find myself on the ground staring up at a passing cloud that looks suspiciously like failure. "Good form," Reginald says dryly, if the goal was to assault the air itself. Sword drills, I've discovered, are less about improving technique and more about perfecting the art of staying conscious while everything hurts. You swing. You parry. You try not to think about the smell of the man next to you who hasn't bathed since the last coronation. Reginald occasionally shouts encouragement like, "Put your back into it," or try not to make eye contact with the ground. So often. By the third hour, my arms feel as though they've been replaced with boiled cabbage, and I find myself longing for the sweet release of plague. When Reginald finally calls for jousting practice, I briefly consider faking death. Alas, he's seen that trick before. Jousting, as I've come to learn, is not so much a sport as a collective delusion, an agreement among knights that charging directly at another human being with a long stick is a rational thing to do. It's essentially sprinting at your problems while praying your horse doesn't decide to clock out early. My steed for today is Geoffrey, a magnificent creature, perfectly proportioned, beautifully groomed, and utterly convinced that he's better than me, which, to be fair, he is. His mane is shinier than any hair I've ever had, and his eyes carry that quiet intelligence that says, I understand what's happening here, and I disapprove. Mounting him is an ordeal of its own. My armor catches, my foot slips, and, for a brief humiliating moment, I'm suspended halfway up, resembling nothing so much as a metallic frog in existential crisis. When I finally manage to sit astride him, Geoffrey snorts in a tone that could only mean you? Again? Sir Reginald waves a hand, signaling the start. My opponent is Sir Lionel, who's built like a battering ram and has the unshakable confidence of a man who's never learned the concept of mortality. We lower our lances. Geoffrey shifts impatiently beneath me, no doubt wondering why humans insist on doing this nonsense. And then we charge. The world becomes a blur of thunder, hooves, and regret. My grip tightens. The lance wobbles alarmingly, and I have just enough time to think this was a terrible idea before impact. There's a loud crack somewhere between wood, pride, and maybe a rib, and miraculously, I'm still in the saddle. Lionel, however, is not. He's lying several yards away, face down, presumably questioning his entire lineage. A small gathering of squires begins to cheer, though mostly because they're bored. Sir Reginald, ever the fountain of warmth, claps, me on the back hard enough to rattle the dented parts of my soul. Almost looked competent there for a second, he says, which, coming from him, is equivalent to a standing ovation. Between drills, I have time to reflect on the peculiar design of armor. It's a marvel of craftsmanship, forged by people who clearly despised human comfort. Every plate, buckle, and rivet seems specifically engineered to make basic movement a philosophical concept rather than a practical one. Walking feels like attempting yoga inside a barrel. Sitting down is not so much discouraged as physically impossible. The helmet, my personal favorite, offers 2 inches of visibility and a delightful echo chamber that turns every breath into a haunted symphony of my own despair. Should one sneeze inside it, and I have, the resulting experience is something between a baptism and a near-death event. Still, armor does make one look heroic, provided no one asks you to move or speak, or exist for longer than 10 seconds. From afar, a knight in armor looks noble, stoic, invincible. Up close, you realize he's just a sweaty man in an expensive prison. Later, while we rest beneath a crooked banner that smells faintly of mildew, Reginald decides it's the perfect moment to lecture on the code of chivalry. He recites it with the same reverence a priest might reserve for scripture, though I can't help noticing that the code is suspiciously vague. Be brave, be loyal, die politely. Treat women with respect unless they own land you'd like to conquer. When I ask whether it includes anything about honesty or fair wages, he stares at me as though I've just questioned gravity. Apparently, the true purpose of chivalry is to look virtuous while ensuring everyone else remains beneath you. How very noble. My thoughts drift, as they often do, to horses. Horses are the true nobility here, magnificent beasts with better diets, better grooming, and in Geoffrey's case, better social awareness. He knows when I'm nervous and chooses that moment to sneeze directly into my visor. He knows when I'm trying to appear confident in front of other knights, and takes that opportunity to emit a sound not unlike a dying trumpet. And yet he is admired, coddled, and endlessly praised. Meanwhile I, his so-called master, am occasionally thrown into the mud for sport. It strikes me that horses have life figured out. They eat when they want. They sleep when they want. Their every need is attended to by squires who would probably forget to feed a human, but will happily brush a horse for hours. Geoffrey doesn't worry about honor or tournaments or chivalry. He exists purely to be admired and occasionally to humiliate me, and I respect him for that. By late afternoon, my limbs have given up on subtlety and are now sending open letters of protest to the rest of my body. My armor is dented, my pride is bruised, and I have hay in places hay should never be. Reginald gives a curt nod, which in his language translates roughly to, "You haven't died yet," astonishing. I take it as a compliment, as I lead Geoffrey back to the stables. He flicks his tail at me, a gentle reminder of who truly runs this place. The sun dips behind the battlements, casting everything in a soft, golden haze that might almost be beautiful if I weren't covered in mud, sweat, and faint embarrassment. I suppose in the grand scheme of things, this is what being a knight truly is. Looking heroic from a distance while falling apart up close. And tomorrow, of course, I'll wake up and do it all again, because somewhere, somehow, someone decided this was noble. Once you survive the morning drills and the awkward politeness of castle life, you might imagine that your day as a knight would involve grand adventure, heroic battles, and perhaps the occasional dragon to slay. How naive. The reality of knighthood is far less romantic. It is a ceaseless treadmill of errands, odd jobs, and long, soggy walks across fields while trying not to look like an utter fool, which of course is impossible. My first task begins with a missive from the Lord, a scroll sealed with wax and inscribed with urgent squiggles that seem to translate roughly as, "Go somewhere, do something, pretend it's important." I lift it carefully, knowing that the slightest tilt could turn it into papier-mâché. The journey is through a field so slick with mud it might double as a pond. Each step is a negotiation with gravity. My boots cling to the soil like despair, to the human soul, and I stumble frequently, managing only a tenuous relationship with dignity. Midway through, a goose of questionable temperament charges at me. Its honks are shrill, accusatory, and entirely personal. I dodge, flail, and land half in a puddle, mud squelching between my toes as I salvage the letter with heroic futility. Delivering messages is, I discover, far more exhausting than actual combat. Nobles rarely remember what they've asked you to deliver, which means you often end up carrying the same note back and forth as though it were a sacred ritual of futility. I approach a minor lord, bow deeply, and hand over the scroll. He squints, scratches his chin, and announces, "Ah, yes, I wrote this. Or maybe I didn't. Wait, where is it?" Then he waves vaguely at a nearby hedge and instructs me to deliver it to someone else. Heroism clearly has been redefined in this era. I tuck the scroll under my arm and trudge on, the mud trying to reclaim its prize with every step. Halfway through the morning, I am assigned the truly glorious task of escorting Lady Hildegard to the far end of the castle grounds. She is a minor noble of impressive hauteur, who spends most of the journey complaining about the wind, the sun, and the audacity of squirrels. My horse, Geoffrey, ever judgmental, impeccably groomed, and infinitely superior in every way, walks alongside us with the calm disdain of someone who has witnessed human folly for decades. I try to keep pace, balancing awkwardly in the saddle, pondering whether this truly is what knighthood was meant to be. A series of long walks where every word you speak risks misinterpretation, and every step risks catastrophe. The errands continue with escalating absurdity. Fetching packages, carrying heavy loads of unspecified importance, opening gates that have become self-consciously obstinate over centuries, and generally being expected to look imposing while performing tasks that would be far less stressful, if attempted by a pack mule. Each duty is framed as noble service, but feels more like a medieval endurance test, designed to see how long a man can survive mud, sun, and subtle humiliation without collapsing into tears. At one point, I am asked to deliver a basket of supplies to the cook. A simple enough errand, you might think, only to have the basket collapse mid-stride, scattering carrots, turnips, and an onion that bounces into Geoffrey's hooves. He looks at me with calm disapproval. I bow, mutter apologies, and continue onward, learning that humility is an essential skill for survival. Amid these errands, armor remains my constant, begrudging companion. Polishing, oiling, and hammering dents is a full-time occupation. I spend hours scrubbing a single gauntlet to a shine, while another piece, the breastplate forever catching dust, sweat, and the occasional pigeon dropping, refuses to comply. Chainmail, heavy and unyielding, is a perpetual reminder that humans were never designed to be walking tin cans. By the time I have finished one section, another requires attention. My sword, too, demands polishing, though I know I may never swing it in a meaningful battle again. The work is meditative in a tragic, exhausting way, repetitive, meticulous, and endlessly unrewarding. Yet somehow, the sense of survival, of continuing to function in this absurd world, keeps me going. Along the way, unexpected encounters pepper the day. Peasants wander past, occasionally pausing to stare. Children, braver than their parents, ask impossible questions. Why do you wear so much metal? Or, do your boots make you stronger? I consider explaining the philosophy of endurance, the poetry of survival, the subtle art of mud diplomacy, but decide against it. Instead, I smile faintly and offer a non-committal shrug, which seems to satisfy them enough to move on. Then, there are the animals. Jeffrey, naturally, is judgmental, as previously noted, but other creatures are less discreet. A goat discovers my helmet while I am polishing my sword and decides to test it as a chew toy. I chase it across the courtyard, slipping, flailing, and only barely reclaiming my dignity. Nearby, a dog barks indignantly at my progress, as if insisting that all knights are inherently unworthy of passage. Even the squirrels seem to mock me, darting through trees with the speed and precision of creatures that understand the absurdity of mortal effort. By mid-afternoon, the full weight of the day's labor begins to settle. Legs ache, shoulders protest under armor, and a general sense of existential fatigue creeps in. Heroism, I reflect, is not in the parades, battles, or grand gestures. It is in surviving long enough to deliver the next scroll, to polish the next gauntlet, to walk patiently behind Lady Hildegard without tripping over a loose stone or a disgruntled peasant. It is in persistence, in minor victories over mud, over gravity, over one's own hubris. I pause on a conveniently dry stone, a rare and miraculous feature in a landscape designed for slippage, and survey the courtyard. The sun is drifting toward the horizon, casting long, uneven shadows that twist familiar shapes into strange forms. The banners flap lazily, seemingly uninterested in human ambition. The stables cough and clatter in the distance. Somewhere a goose quacks its final verdict on my competence. The day's absurdity becomes almost poetic in its monotony. There is rhythm here, subtle and slow. Stumble, stand, deliver, polish. Dodge, repeat. Then come the minor crises that make every day memorable in small, ridiculous ways. The cook loses a pot lid, which I am expected to retrieve from the roof of a shed. A messenger has misplaced a scroll, sending me on a wild goose chase that is literally literal. The stables release a particularly mischievous mule that chases me across the grounds until Jeffrey intervenes, calm, precise, and entirely unimpressed. Every misadventure is simultaneously exhausting and comically unavoidable. As the sun finally dips behind the towers, painting the sky in a half-hearted attempt at beauty, I begin the long walk back to the castle. Boots caked in mud, armor smudged. With a mixture of sweat, soot, and indignation, I feel every muscle protesting in unison. The errands have ended, but the ache remains. Yet in that ache, there is a strange satisfaction, the quiet acknowledgement that I have endured. I have survived another day of noble errands, ridiculous tasks, and minor humiliations. I have maintained armor, delivered messages, navigated livestock, and survived geese. For today, that is enough. Inside the castle, I shed gauntlets smeared with grime, brush mud from boots, and reflect in the flickering firelight. The world outside will romanticize knighthood, speak of bravery and honor, and omit the absurdly mundane truth. But I know, the essence of knighthood is endurance. It is muddied, exhausting, ridiculous, occasionally hilarious, and, despite all, oddly comforting. There is a rhythm to it, a cadence to the chaos, a soft, persistent reminder that survival itself is worthy, even if glory is optional. As evening settles in, I allow myself a brief, quiet sigh. Tomorrow the errands will resume. The mud will wait, Jeffrey will judge. Scrolls will be misdelivered, packages will fall, and gates will defy me once again. And I will rise, trudging into the absurdity, polishing, delivering, and pretending to know what I am doing, because that in truth is all any knight ever really does. For now, however, there is a gentle pause. The sun has set, the courtyard is emptying, and the castle's walls exhale their centuries of drafty history. I sit for a moment, letting the day's ridiculousness settle into memory, a soft echo of endurance, humor, and mud. The errands may never make it into songs, the minor victories will be invisible to history, and the geese will never be honored in tales of valor. But I know, and that is enough. I rise slowly, trudging toward the warmth of the great hall, armor creaking, boots, heavy, spirit intact if battered. In the quiet of the castle evening, I reflect one final time. Life as a knight is absurd, exhausting, and mostly unremarkable. And yet, there is a strange beauty in that truth. It is mundane, it is messy, it is occasionally hilarious, and somehow it is mine to endure. By mid-afternoon, after surviving the mud, geese, and endless errands, I find myself in an unexpected, yet thoroughly inevitable predicament. Injured. Not gravely, mind you, just bruised, scraped, and occasionally thwacked by gravity or an inanimate object with all the malicious intent of the universe. Perhaps I tripped over a stray boot, or perhaps a particularly judgmental branch insisted on rearranging my face. Either way, I am now in need of what passes for medical attention in the medieval era, which is to say something between guesswork, superstition, and general chaos. I approach the apothecary, a small, dimly lit room tucked into the corner of the castle that smells of vinegar, herbs, and faint despair. Shelves sag under the weight of jars filled with powders, dried roots, and substances that should not, under any reasonable circumstances, exist anywhere near living things. A faint layer of dust hovers in the air, settling over my armor and hair, giving me the distinct impression that I am being initiated into some secret society of misfortune. The apothecary herself, Mistress Agatha, greets me with a glare that suggests she has already calculated exactly how incompetent I am and intends to enjoy the results. "Ah," she says, inspecting the scrape on my forearm, "a most dire wound. Perhaps you should have applied leeches earlier." Her tone is casual, as though suggesting a cup of tea. I squint at her. "Leeches?" I ask, not entirely certain whether I misheard. "Yes," she says, nodding. "To draw out the, misfortune." I nod slowly, carefully not to make eye contact with the jar of wriggling things on the shelf. Somehow I feel it is judging me. The treatment begins with the ritualistic application of poultices. A cold, vaguely plant-based paste is smeared onto my arm with the precision of someone performing minor exorcism. Mistress Agatha murmurs to herself, consulting a tattered book whose pages are curling in every direction, perhaps asking permission from the universe to heal me. I reflect on how modern medicine has ruined us. There is no poetry in the sterile, antiseptic of today. Here in this apothecary, each bandage carries the weight of mystery, danger, and faint hope. While the poultice sets, I wander the room, absorbing the subtle chaos. Bottles of unknown liquids are labeled in such a way that suggests either ancient wisdom or sheer spite. Drink 3 spoonfuls, recite your sins aloud, avoid geese, one label advises. Another simply says, do not apply near eyes, unless ambitious. I ponder the efficacy of all of this. Surely, if survival hinged on herb paste and cryptic instructions, I should already be incapacitated by now. Yet I remain, for reasons unknown even to me, upright and breathing. This seems like an accomplishment worth noting. Mistress Agatha then inspects my knees, which bear the bruises of countless stumbles across mud, stone, and occasionally my own feet. "Ah, these will need bandaging," she intones. The procedure is elaborate, requiring me to bend, twist, and occasionally lie down in positions that defy anatomical logic. I begin to suspect that a large part of medieval medicine is the subtle torture of patients for the sake of appearances. I allow myself a small internal sigh. Stoicism is the true skill here. The castle staff, as always, provide a gentle chorus of judgment and guidance. A squire hovers nearby, eager to assist, yet somehow managing to make me feel entirely incompetent. "Let me hold the bandage," he says. I hand it over, and he immediately wraps it in a manner that ensures I will trip on it later. I nod politely, thinking of how often the official hierarchy of knighthood seems inverted. I, a knight, must endure minor indignities from the very people technically beneath me. The apothecary offers various remedies with accompanying instructions that range from confusing to alarming. Apply this poultice twice daily, recite the incantation of patience, and avoid the shadows of any tree taller than your horse. I nod, carefully considering how to fit these requirements into a schedule that also involves errand running, armor maintenance, and if fortune allows, lunch. She hands me a small vial of liquid, its color resembling a boiled beet. "This is for courage," she explains. "Drink it if you wish to avoid fainting during future scrapes, falls, or minor." Indignities. I tuck it into my belt and reflect that courage, in this form, smells faintly of despair and tastes faintly of beet. As I wander back toward the castle hall, I encounter other knights returning from their own minor calamities, torn tunics, bloodied, knees and the ever-present mud. We nod at each other in a sort of quiet solidarity, silently acknowledging that our heroics today have been more about survival and endurance than glory. Small injuries are badges of persistence. Poultices are the new medals, and any day spent upright is a triumph. Along the way, I encounter the inevitable interactions with castle staff. Cooks, squires, and servants glide past with practiced precision, offering advice, judgment, and occasionally unsolicited commentary. "How you might want to wrap that differently," says a cook, gesturing to the bandage around my arm. I nod, not because it is helpful, but because acknowledgement seems the proper human response to expertise I do not possess. I reflect on how the medieval hierarchy is complex. I am a knight, technically noble, yet physically weaker and infinitely more accident-prone than everyone around me. The dynamic is humbling, though not unpleasant, and adds a layer of quiet comedy to the day's suffering. Even minor tasks become arenas of subtle terror. I attempt to fetch a steaming mug of broth, balancing it alongside a bandaged arm, a poultice, and Geoffrey, who is now silently judging my coordination. Somehow, I avoid spilling, but just barely. The kitchen staff clap politely, whether in celebration or ironic commentary is unclear. I retreat to a quiet corner, allowing the warmth of the broth to seep into my frozen fingers, and marvel that small victories, though trivial, feel monumental in this world. The day wears on, and I find a quiet nook by a window. The light outside is fading, soft and patient, illuminating the courtyard and towers in a gentle, forgiving glow. I inspect my arm and leg, feeling the poultice's cool insistence against my bruises. The world is calm here, despite the absurdity of the remedies, the chaos of errands, and the constant mud. I reflect on the strange poetry of it all. Medieval medicine, though ineffective by modern standards, has a rhythm, a ritual, a certain dignity in its absurdity. It is not about curing the body as much as it is about enduring, persisting, and acknowledging the small, ridiculous miracles of survival. In these moments, the knight's life seems less about grandeur and more about navigating a series of minor disasters with minimal embarrassment. Every scrape, bruise, or poultice becomes a meditation on patience, every awkward interaction a lesson in humility. The care, the ritual, the soft absurdity of tending one's own injuries or those of a companion is simultaneously exhausting, comical, and strangely comforting. By evening, I am sufficiently patched, bandaged, and slightly more upright than before. The firelight in the hall flickers against the stone walls, casting shadows that mimic my own movements and exaggerate my already awkward posture. I sit quietly, sipping a small mug of something vaguely nourishing, and reflect on the absurdity and endurance of the day. I have survived minor injuries, absurd remedies, judgmental animals, and the quiet scrutiny of castle staff. I have walked through mud, balanced precariously while bandaged, and persisted in a world that treats heroism and futility as interchangeable. And yet, in that survival, in that careful endurance, there is a subtle triumph. Heroism may not lie in battles, jousts, or grand gestures, but in showing up, in continuing, in existing in this absurd, muddy, poultice-filled world with dignity, or at least an approximation of it. As night falls, I find a quiet bench near the hearth, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The poultices cling, the bandages are secure, and Geoffrey, ever watchful, glances at me with what I imagine is pride, though it is more likely judgment. The castle hums softly. Footsteps echo in distant halls. The wind whispers through the towers, and somewhere a dog sighs, as if marking the end of another nightly day. I close my eyes for a brief moment, reflecting that tomorrow will bring new errands, new bruises, and new absurdities. Yet for tonight, in this small, flickering warmth, I rest. Even as the songs of history will glorify battles, tournaments, and heroic feats, I know the truth. The quiet, painstaking, absurd, and slightly disgusting work of survival, tending wounds and navigating daily life, this is where the real endurance lies. Heroism is muddy, awkward, and often pungent. It is a slow, meticulous, and ridiculous ballet of perseverance, and somehow in this world that is more than enough. Life inside the castle is, in theory, a mark of prestige. A seat among nobility, a place at the grand table, the warm flicker of torches against stone walls. In practice, it is mostly drafts. Drafts and people complaining about drafts, and then complaining about how the complaining isn't helping the drafts. Every corridor whispers, not with intrigue, but with the sound of wind desperately trying to escape. The stones themselves seem coldly indifferent, like they've seen far too much, and none of it was interesting. Each morning begins with a kind of ritual chaos. Servants scurry about carrying trays of something that was once edible. Dogs bark at things that probably don't exist, and the nobles gather in little clusters to gossip with the quiet enthusiasm of people who have never lifted anything heavier than a wine jug. The great hall echoes with the murmur of politics and personal scandal, the two great pillars of medieval conversation. I take my usual place near the long table, doing my best to look like someone important, while secretly trying to defrost. The benches, carved from the densest wood known to man, seem specifically designed to punish the concept of comfort. The moment you sit, they begin a slow, deliberate campaign to reshape your spine into something tragic. Across from me sits Sir Edwin, who has all the personality of boiled cabbage and insists on sharing his views about grain taxes every morning. "The Duke's taken another halfpenny from every bushel," he grumbles between mouthfuls of grey porridge. "Mark my words, soon he'll start taxing the air." I nod politely, because that's the required response, and because I've already tried disagreeing once. It resulted in a 15-minute lecture about the moral decline of bread. The weather, as always, is another popular subject. "How's the weather?" they ask, as though it's a mysterious new phenomenon. "Mud," someone inevitably replies. Mud is the national climate, the preferred element, the all-encompassing presence. It is inescapable. It's in the roads, on our boots, in our soup, and I strongly suspect in our personalities. After the morning's obligatory dose of dreariness, the castle begins to shift into its afternoon rhythm. Nobles wandering aimlessly, from one chilly room to another, servants polishing the same candlesticks into oblivion, and somewhere in the distance, a minstrel attempting to convince everyone that the lute is not a cry for help. I stroll through the great hall pretending I have somewhere to be, which is the nightly version of productivity. The walls are adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of glorious battle, each one a wildly optimistic interpretation of events. In reality, most of those heroic victories were the result of bad weather, misplaced maps, or someone's horse sneezing at an inconvenient moment. Still, they do add color to an otherwise beige existence, and I sometimes like to imagine myself among them, the stoic figure with perfect posture and presumably no drafts. Come evening, the castle prepares for a banquet, the medieval equivalent of a group endurance challenge. The cooks, who seem to regard seasoning as witchcraft, lay out an impressive array of dishes, each one carefully designed to confuse both stomach and soul. There are half a dozen courses, none of which are properly cooked. The fish smells like a dare. The meat could double as a weapon, the bread could survive a siege. Yet everyone smiles politely and pretends this is the height of luxury, while discreetly feeding their portions to the dogs beneath the table, who, to their credit, show admirable bravery. As I chew my way through something that might once have been poultry, I attempt conversation with my fellow knights. "So," I venture, "how fares your estate?" This is the medieval version of small talk, the equivalent of discussing mortgage rates in a modern waiting room. "Flooded," says Sir Edwin without enthusiasm. "Again." He takes a sip of ale. "How about yours?" "Burned," I reply. We nod in mutual understanding, bonded by shared misfortune and the vague hope that the afterlife involves plumbing. Sir Geoffrey, not to be confused with my horse, who is infinitely more intelligent, joins in to discuss the recent plague. "It's made its way up from the coast," he says, as though announcing a new line of imported cheese. "Nasty business. They say it turns your toes black before you're even finished praying." "Ah," says Sir Edwin thoughtfully, "at least it's quick." "True," I add. "Quicker than breakfast anyway." We all laugh the way people do when they've run out of options. At some point, the lady of the court drifts into the hall, a vision of grace and questionable sobriety. She moves like a poem someone forgot to finish, serene, elegant, and slightly unsteady on her feet. Her gown catches the candlelight as she glides past, smiling the way only someone tipsy on mead can smile, with confidence and absolutely no memory of consequences. "Sir Knight," she says, pausing near me, "you look dreadfully serious. Smile more, it confuses your enemies." She takes another sip of her golden drink and sweeps onward, leaving behind a faint scent of honey and mystery. I sit there, for a long moment, staring after her, wondering if I've just been complimented or threatened, possibly both. As the banquet drags on, conversation fades into a haze of laughter, burps, and the soft hum of the fire. The hall feels warmer now, or perhaps I've simply gone numb. Somewhere near the hearth, a bard strums a slow tune that sounds like nostalgia itself. I drift toward the fire, seeking a pocket of peace amid the noise. The flames dance lazily, sending small sparks into the smoky air, and I let the warmth seep into my battered armor. For a moment, it's almost pleasant. The laughter becomes distant, the chatter fades to a gentle murmur, and I find myself lost in quiet thought. How did I end up here? Was this really the grand destiny promised by tales of knighthood? Endless draughts, wooden chairs, and stew that tastes faintly of defeat. Perhaps I was meant for something else, something quieter. Maybe I could have been a monk. Monks seem peaceful. No armor, no tournaments, just books and chanting, and the occasional argument about punctuation. It sounds idyllic, really. I stare into the fire a little longer, imagining myself in a silent monastery somewhere, wrapped in robes instead of steel, drinking wine that doesn't double as paint thinner. The thought lingers as my eyelids grow. Heavy, the warmth wrapping around me like a forgiving cloak. The hall buzzes behind me, alive with foolish stories and forced laughter, but I no longer care. For the first time all day, I feel something close to peace, fleeting, fragile, and probably undeserved. If tomorrow brings more mud, more drills, and more of Sir Reginald's onion-scented pep talks, so be it. For now, there is fire, and the faint, comforting illusion that I might have survived another day with dignity mostly intact. And if not, well, perhaps the monastery would still have me. They tell you that battle is glorious, that it awakens the soul, sharpens the mind, and burns a bright memory into history. They neglect to mention the dampness, the smell of mud and fear that clings to every seam of your armor, the way a man suddenly becomes acutely aware of the fragility of his own bladder, while being jostled through a human stampede of screaming, armored people. Dawn arrives over the field, pale and hesitant, stretching across the hills in a way that almost convinces you that you might be somewhere beautiful, if beauty were measured in mud, blood, and regret. The mist drifts lazily over the grass, turning the world into a soft grey dreamscape, which in this particular moment is more comforting than it should be, given that every horizon is lined with men preparing to maim each other for the sake of honor, banners, and presumably lunch. I step forward, armor creaking like an old cabinet in protest, and attempt to find my place among the knights. They all look impressive from a distance, polished helmets gleaming in the sun, swords raised as though they could cut through destiny itself. Up close, however, it's a different story. Faces grim, mouths clamped shut, hands shaking, and the occasional knight staring at his own gauntlet, as if it were a puzzle designed to humiliate him. I find it comforting to know that I am not alone in my misery. The air is heavy with the scent of metal, sweat, and a faint, unmistakable undertone of excrement, which no one will acknowledge, but everyone knows is there. Somewhere off to my left, a horse snorts indignantly, kicking at the mud as though it disapproves of its human companions. Its rider, attempting a heroic posture, promptly trips on a root and crashes into the mud with a dignity I would envy if I weren't so busy trying to breathe without swallowing soil. A horn blows, sharp, strident, and entirely unforgiving. The battle begins, and immediately everything devolves into chaos. What had seemed orderly from the safety of the castle ramparts now looks like hundreds of people flailing in slow motion. Swords clang in a rhythm that is less music and more a persistent metallic groan. Shields collide with a dull thunk, and helmets clatter to the ground like the casualties of some absurd percussion experiment. I raise my sword heroically, as any song or tale insists I must, and promptly drop it because my arm has gone numb, a betrayal I had not anticipated but deeply respect. Nearby, a man attempts a noble swing, only to realize mid-motion that his visor has fogged, and he spends the next several minutes swinging at what appears to be an invisible enemy. A horse, feeling neglected, decides now is the perfect moment to panic, and runs directly through our own line, scattering men and shouting alike. Every step I take is a negotiation with gravity. Mud grabs at my boots like a persistent child, yanking me down just when I think I might achieve something resembling heroism. Swords fly through the air in arcs that could be called elegant if elegance involved potential decapitation. Helmets tilt at absurd angles, revealing a single eye peering out in terror. And somewhere someone screams the word "advance," which is promptly ignored because no one is entirely sure who is speaking. Time dilates. Minutes stretch into long, confusing hours. I cannot tell if I am moving forward, backward, or simply spinning in place. My thoughts drift between tactical consideration and pure, desperate, unfiltered panic. The clanging, the shouting, the sound of horses and men colliding all blends into a single, rhythmic, hypnotic cacophony. It is terrifying, yes, but there is also a strange beauty in the chaos, like watching a storm from the safety of a cave, except you are simultaneously part of the storm and being struck by it repeatedly. I glance around. There is Sir Lionel, who up until a moment ago appeared to be a beacon of confident aggression. He now lies face down in a puddle, hat askew, a boot flailing absurdly in the air. The horse he was riding has calmly wandered off to inspect a nearby banner, which it is now chewing. In another moment I see Sir Geoffrey, a man known for his strategic genius, slip on a clump of mud and land, sprawling in a way that must surely earn a medal for unintended slapstick. There is no rhyme or reason here, only an endless, soft, dreamlike flow of calamity, punctuated by the occasional shout of someone who is either inspiring or panicking. You cannot tell the difference. I attempt to move, to act with purpose, but every motion is slowed by the weight of chainmail and armor, which seems specifically engineered to remind me that humans were never meant to be metal boxes on two legs. My sword swings, half-heartedly heroic, find nothing to meet. Perhaps it hits a man, perhaps a shield, perhaps the air itself. I apologize preemptively, as is custom. Somewhere to my right, a knight trips on a stray banner and takes half the platoon with him. It is the sort of minor disaster that decides battles, I think, as I narrowly avoid tripping over my own boots. Victory clearly is less about skill than it is about not being the first to kiss the mud. Somewhere above me, a bird circles, clearly judging. I imagine it chirping to itself. These fools again. Truly the species deserves better. And I agree, though I am too busy keeping my footing to vocalize it. The sensory experience of battle is overwhelming. The smell alone is enough to make one question existence. Mud, metal, blood, sweat, fire, and something that might be cheese mingle into a singular bouquet of medieval survival. The air vibrates with shouts and clangs, and the ground trembles beneath hooves, boots, and whatever mistakes we make next. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the numbness, despite the faint certainty that this is a terrible idea, there is something calming about it. Perhaps it is the rhythm, the inevitability, the way everyone seems equally lost. There is no need to plan. There is only the moment. Swing, step, stumble, breathe. I try to follow orders. Somewhere in the confusion, someone shouts, "Hold the line!" which sounds inspiring until you realize half the line has already dissolved into mud. I charge. I parry. I try not to notice that my helmet has shifted, and I can see only a narrow strip of battlefield ahead. The narrowness of vision does wonders for focusing the mind, I discover. It also ensures that I miss the cavalry coming up on my left. A horse collides gently with me, knocking me sideways, and I spend a few minutes sprawled in a mud puddle considering my life choices. Sporadically, moments of absurd clarity arise. I see a man waving his sword, shouting something that may be a command or a poem. Another has tripped over a fallen lance, only to have it impale a nearby tree. Horses gallop through, the melee with the dignity of disinterested aristocrats. Someone is screaming about dinner. Someone else, I swear, is trying to negotiate a ceasefire with a shrub. I pause to consider this. This is the art of battle, apparently. Moments of pure chaos, punctuated by accidental heroism. And yet, somehow, after what could be hours or moments, the concept of time is elastic here. The battle begins to resolve itself. The yelling diminishes. The horses stop dancing through our lines with reckless enthusiasm. The air smells more faintly of smoke and less faintly of other people's panic. Men are surveying themselves, counting limbs, breathing heavily, trying not to vomit into the mud. The banners hang at odd angles, some torn, some lost entirely, and the field stretches before me like a bizarre mosaic of chaos and suffering. I stand there, sword hanging loosely at my side, mud clinging to every crevice of armor, hair, and dignity. Somewhere Sir Reginald limps past, muttering about tactics that surely exist only in his imagination. Geoffrey the horse looks at me with his usual judgmental glare, mane perfect as ever, tail flicking lazily as if to say, "You've done well," enough not to embarrass me too much. The sun, pale and unsentimental, breaks through the clouds for a moment, casting soft light over the wreckage of organized panic. I inhale the air, tasting smoke, mud, and exhaustion, and I am struck by a sudden, stark, very dry realization. This is what victory smells like. Not the pride of songs or poems, not the golden glow of achievement. Victory is smoke and fear and other people's panic, and perhaps a faint undertone of regret. I let myself breathe for a moment, standing quietly amidst the chaos, letting the surreal rhythm of destruction sink into a gentle, dreamlike cadence. The clash of swords and hooves fades in my mind to a lullaby of chaos, the screams softening to murmurs, the metallic clangs receding into a persistent hum that is oddly comforting. I think about how little planning matters, how the most important strategy is simply not to be the first to trip, the first to lose a horse, or the first to panic. Somehow in this bizarre calculus I have survived. And so I stand there, mud-streaked, battered, and faintly heroic, in the sense that I am still upright, and I allow a small, private smile to tug at the corner of my mouth. Battles, it seems, are never what they are described to be. They are not glorious, they are not elegant, and they are not fair. They are the slow, endless unfolding of absurdity, punctuated by brief, improbable success. I take one last look around the field, inhaling the rich, strange, oddly comforting scent of victory in all its unsavory glory, and I think quietly that perhaps next time I could negotiate with the enemy from the safety of a window. Perhaps next time heroism could be something quieter, something slower, something less muddy. But for now, I am alive. The moon hangs over the castle like a pale witness to all the folly of the day, spilling silver light across the battlements and courtyards. As I trudge back through the gate, armor clinking and groaning like a wind chime built entirely of small livestock, I am reminded once more that knighthood is less a career than a continuous negotiation with gravity, metal, and personal dignity. The cold night air is sharp on my face, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the day's battles and the lingering aroma of something vaguely organic that I do not wish to identify. Each step I take is punctuated by the mournful clang of armor, settling into its nightly posture, a sound simultaneously proud and pathetic, announcing to all within earshot, "I have survived barely, and I am miserable." Entering my chamber, I survey the space with a mixture of relief and quiet horror. The straw mattress greets me with a sigh that suggests mutual regret. The walls, drafty and indifferent, lean in like a chorus of silent critics, and somewhere in a dark corner, I suspect a rat is considering whether it can file a formal complaint. About cohabitation. The process of removing armor begins, one piece at a time, each requiring more effort and ingenuity than the last. Gauntlets are wrestled from my hands like recalcitrant puppies. Greaves must be eased past knees that are no longer certain which direction they bend. The breastplate resists like a jealous lover, clinging to my torso with all the affection of a damp, unwilling barnacle. By the time the helmet comes off, I feel as though I have emerged from a metal cocoon, blinking at the moonlight and wondering whether my reflection is even capable of recognition. Dinner, such as it is, waits in the corner of the hall, something vaguely stew-shaped floating in a broth that is more suggestion than substance. The meat is suspiciously firm, the vegetables have taken on a questionable translucence, and the aroma wavers between comforting and accusatory. I eat slowly, mindfully, trying not to imagine what might have crawled through it in its pre-cooked life. Every bite reminds me that heroism is mostly a matter of endurance, and that the digestive system, much like the spirit, can survive almost anything with enough resolve. As I sit there staring into the gentle flicker of candlelight, I allow my mind to wander through the day's events. The battles, the mud, the swords, the shouting, all the glorious chaos begin to take shape in memory not as terror, but as absurdity. I recall raising my sword with all the dignity I could muster, only to drop it moments later when my arm refused to cooperate. I remember Geoffrey the horse, noble and judgmental, maneuvering through the melee with a grace I could only dream of, while I performed the human equivalent of flailing spaghetti. I think of Sir Reginald and Sir Lionel and all the minor disasters, mishaps and minor injuries that collectively defined the day, and I conclude with no small amount of dry satisfaction that this is what heroism looks like in reality. Sweating, limping, and pretending you know what you are doing while everyone else does the same. The castle quiets gradually. Footsteps fade into echoes. Torches sputter in their sconces, and the distant sound of a dog sighing somewhere deep in the halls is amplified in the night. The great hall, so lively during the day, becomes a soft chamber of shadows and gentle warmth. I wander closer to the fire, sinking onto the edge of a bench, letting the residual heat seep through my tired bones. The flames crackle in a rhythm that is almost hypnotic, and I find myself tracing their movements with my gaze, imagining them telling stories of victories, failures, and things long forgotten. Outside, the moon drifts higher, illuminating the towers and parapets with a calm, patient light, as if offering silent consolation to all who dwell within these ancient stones. My thoughts begin to soften, stretching toward half-dreams. I imagine history attempting to romanticize today's events. The songs will speak of noble knights charging fearlessly, swords raised high, glory shining in every eye. They will not mention the mud, the numb arms, the awkward collisions, or the subtle panic that underpinned every so-called victory. They will not describe the horse's judgmental glances, the minor injuries that throbbed in rhythm with every heartbeat, or the quiet despair that occasionally flickered behind our visors. Instead, it will all be heroism and grandeur, a tale, polished until it gleams brighter than any armor ever could. And in that I find a strange comfort, the understanding that the world is kinder in memory than in experience, and that perhaps it is meant to be so. I lean back, letting the warmth of the fire, the lingering scent of stew, and the quiet night settle around me. The day's absurdity fades into a gentle haze. I feel my limbs soften, my breathing slow, and my mind begin to drift along the soft currents of sleep. The clinking of armor has ceased, replaced by the distant sighs of the castle, the rustle of fabric in empty corridors, and the low, steady crackle of flames. For a moment, I let myself linger in the quiet satisfaction of survival. Not triumph, not glory, but survival. I have raised a sword. I have dodged mud, shame, and several minor disasters. I have stumbled, fallen, and gotten up again. The songs will never know the half of it, but that is precisely the point. Heroism, as recorded, is clean and noble. Heroism as experienced is muddy, exhausting, and slightly ridiculous. Yet somehow, in the end, it is enough to keep going. Enough to warrant another day, another sunrise, another clinking step toward the unknown. As the fire crackles and the moonlight bathes the hall in its patient glow, I close my eyes briefly, imagining all the histories yet to be written, all the tales that will polish the absurdity of today into legends of courage. I imagine bards strumming lutes, chroniclers waxing poetic, and poets pretending every grimace was a smile. The thought is both amusing and strangely soothing. Perhaps it is the best comfort of all, that while we suffer, stumble, and sweat in reality, the stories will forgive us, embellish us, and remember us fondly. And so, with a final glance at the fire's soft glow, I let my body sink further into its temporary reprieve. The hall hums with quiet, the castle breathes slowly, and I drift towards sleep, leaving behind the mud, the chaos, and the absurd heroism of the day. Outside, the moon keeps watch, silent and patient as history begins its gentle work, turning folly into legend, exhaustion into honor, and ridiculousness into bedtime stories for those who will listen, eventually with a smile, and perhaps a little regret. Tonight I am a knight. Tomorrow I will likely rise, armor clanking, ready to do it all over again. But for now there is only warmth, quiet, and the soft, lulling rhythm of a world that will remember us far more elegantly than we ever deserve. And so here we are, having survived another day in the life of a medieval knight, or at least the shadowy, slightly ridiculous version of it I've been dragging you through. Perhaps you've been imagining the clanking of armor, the mud, sucking at boots, the battle cries, and the subtle judgments of horses with better grooming than any nobleman could hope for. Take a deep breath, if you like, and let it out slowly, letting the absurdity of it all settle like a faint layer of dust on the mind. It's worth reflecting, gently, that modern life is, by comparison, almost absurdly comfortable. So, next time, your Wi-Fi fails, or your oat milk runs out, or you realize the coffee is a bit stale, remember, at least you're not boiling in chainmail while Geoffrey the horse stares at you with all the quiet disdain of someone who has seen centuries of human incompetence, all while trying to tune a lute with a hoof. Consider that a minor miracle, and perhaps an encouragement to let the trivial annoyances of today fall away. Tonight, you have only one noble quest: sleep. There are no battles to fight, no tournaments to survive, no armor to wrestle with, no chaotic orchestras of shouting men and judgmental horses to navigate. There is only this quiet, darkened room, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and the knowledge that you've survived. In imagination, if not in actual mud-streaked chaos, another day of the most overrated job in Europe. So close your eyes. Let the fire of thought simmer into embers, and let your mind wander softly, easily into dreams where the battles are forgotten, the armor is gone, and the world, briefly, is just quiet. Perhaps, in that quiet, you will meet Geoffrey once more. Not judgmental, not impatient, merely present as a reminder that life, while absurd, can still have moments of calm. Rest well, brave knight. You've survived another day in the most overrated job in Europe. Let your shoulders loosen, your arms relax, and your imagination drift. The songs of history may romanticize our deeds, but tonight, sleep is the only true glory, and you, dear listener, have earned it.